Okay, so our first speaker tonight is Liz Wheatley. She's a branch secretary for Camden Unison, and she's been newly elected onto Unison's national executive. She'll be speaking in a personal capacity here tonight, and she's also a member of the Socialist Workers' Party.
Okay, thanks. I think I have to start by saying what great news we've had this afternoon, that Tommy Robinson faces up to 2 years in jail for being found guilty. It certainly cheers up my day to know that our milkshakes do indeed bring all the boys to the prison yard. But I mean, there's no doubt that things have changed in the last few years, since Jeremy Corbyn first stood as leader of the Labour Party. And we saw a huge growth of people getting engaged with politics and making it clear that we wanted to see a world for the many, not for the few. And it definitely made for one of the more exciting general elections that we've seen for a while as well. And to be honest, I mean, for me, it was that shift that made me agree to stand as branch secretary of Camden Unison, because I could see the potential for us to organise and campaign and not just be somebody who gets drowned in a sea of casework, as is often the case in the trade union movement. But I think it also highlighted the discontent that's bubbling away beneath the surface in society, that if there is a lead, then actually people will be more up for doing something. So, for instance, this week on Wednesday, we had a rally and met with the council over cuts to school funding, out of which it's been agreed that the councillor will come with us to the Department of Education to hand in hundreds of postcards calling for the £480 per pupil that Camden has lost to be reinstated. That didn't take that much doing, a little bit of leadership from some of the stewards in our branch. Pardon me. But I think there's also a real danger that we can fall into just being spectators about what's going on in the world. You know, watching what's happening over Brexit, watching or commentating on the splits in the Tory party, or indeed what's happening in the Labour Party to people like Chris. And I think it's really important that we mustn't forget that what we do actually makes a difference, that history is made by people like us acting and not watching. So what can we do then? Because, you know, there will be quite a lot of us in this room who are trade union activists, branch secretaries, that, you know, none of us will be general secretaries though, and I'm guessing that Chris will probably be the only MP in here. And I think the first thing that we have to do is to rise to the political issues, to organise and to look for collective resistance, which of course is something, isn't it, that's very easy to say, but isn't always so easy to do. But I think there are concrete things that we can do. And I mean, I referred to Tommy Robinson, but I think one of the biggest challenges we face is the rise of racism. And in our union branch a few years ago, a few of us in the SWP decided that we were going to make this a priority. And we started selling Stand Up to Racism badges, having stalls, leafleting for protests, and it was actually really well received by people. It gave confidence to anti-racists, and it actually, really importantly, gave a higher profile to the union as well. And so on from that, our branch started organising a Stand Up to Racism fringe event at our national conference. That over the last 4 years, I worked it out, we've raised almost £13,000 for Stand Up to Racism by doing that. But as well as doing that, it's also become the place for anti-racist campaigners in the union to come and discuss what we can do about fighting racism. Locally in our branch, we've organised workplace meetings on Holocaust Memorial Day, which means that we've now we've agreed to send members to the Unite Against Fascism educational trip to Auschwitz, and we've got a couple of people already come forward saying they're interested. And we had a lunchtime meeting where about 150 people came to hear Gary Young speak on why Black Lives Matter. I think all of these help make the union the place that people want to come about. And actually, they're all things that anybody can do in any branch. It just takes a bit of nerve to make yourself go and do it. But I think we do also have to look for a fight, and we've just done that recently in Camden with our traffic wardens. I mean, traffic wardens are big news today. We're already talking about our traffic warden sending a message to the one from Westminster who ticketed Tommy Robinson's bus. They did it last time, actually. They did it last time, so on his last court appearance he got ticketed as well. We haven't quite found out yet if it was the same guy. But they've recently had a strike for more pay and better conditions. I just want to say a few things about the strike, really. Apart from, you know, it was really exciting. It was fantastic to be involved in. But our traffic wardens are a privatised workforce. The vast majority of them are black or migrant workers, and that's often the case, isn't it? You know, when a service gets privatised, the hours get longer. They work 42.5 hours a week, a day more than most people in the council. The pay gets lower. They were on £10 an hour when we started this dispute, and the workforce gets blacker. And they voted massively for strike action. In fact, they voted twice for it under the anti-union laws. We had to do 2 ballots because the dispute went on for so long. And they voted for it to be sustained action as well. And actually, they ended up taking 33 days of strike action, which is quite a task for low-paid workers. But the really brilliant thing is they won. And actually, this year, they're the second highest paid traffic wardens on a private contract in London, on £11.48 an hour. Next year, they'll be the highest, which I think just goes to show how effective strikes can be. But I think there's also a couple of other wider points to make about the strike too, because first of all, it wasn't a defensive strike. The vast majority of disputes taking place at the moment are in response to attacks on what's happening in workplaces. This one wasn't that, but it was a good old-fashioned demand for more, for a bigger share of the huge amounts of profit that they make for both the council and the private company, which is, as it happens, has been bought out by an offshore hedge fund registered in the Bahamas. So it was a little bit of a David and Goliath situation. But it's exactly the kind of strike that we're told all too often isn't possible in a time of austerity. And then there's a common argument, isn't there, that migrant workers bring down wages. And that seems to have a lot of popular traction, but actually not only our traffic wardens but also workers like the cleaners at SOAS, at King's and other colleges, I think have really emphatically disproved that argument, and it's something that we have to bring up every time people say that. The strike has also changed the atmosphere for our members. They've taken action before, and so they were well organised. They've had a stewards committee, but they've never had to take so much action, and it meant that they got to know each other. One of the things that has driven me to distraction, they have shoulder numbers like the police, and they always refer to each other as the number. They're called 2360 or 2789. And I'm like, no, you're a name, not a number, and it never worked. Actually, by the end of the strike, they called each other by the names, or indeed the nicknames. At one of the mass meetings where we were distributing strike pay, it was seriously like some kind of talent contest. As individuals came up to collect the cheques, everybody was clapping and cheering, giving them votes on how active they've been on the picket lines and everything like that. It's a massively male workforce. And yet during the dispute, the women were disproportionately at the fore. In the meetings, they were speaking on the megaphone, on protests, and one of the bases has just recently elected a woman steward. And in fact, all the men keep coming up to me from that base saying, you do know we've got a woman steward, don't we? Because they're actually very proud of that. One member, who's a single parent with no family in this country, came up to me at a meeting towards the end of the strike, and she just said, now I have a family, they're here in this room. Another one stood up in a meeting and said that what they were doing was part of a tradition of black people standing up for what's right that ran from fighting slavery to Martin Luther King and civil rights. Now, it might have been slightly over-exaggerating the situation they were in, but the fact that they're starting to see that tradition, I think, was really important. Because taking action means not only do you have the potential to win, but it also changes how you feel about yourself and about the world around you. At the last stewards meeting, they insisted of sending a photograph of themselves in victory poses to the Birmingham home care strikers who had also just won. There's also a belief, though, in a lot of trade unions now that we can't get national action, which means we have a frustration as well as that politicisation. And I think an important job for us as socialists and campaigners and rank and file trade unionists is to try and use local disputes like this to see what we can spread and to try and challenge that argument. I've been told to wind up, so finally I am just going to say something about what I think is the biggest challenge we face for all of us, but particularly in workplaces, and that is of quite literally saving the world. I was at my first meeting of Unison's NEC on Wednesday, and we were told that boots on the street don't work, and that instead we should focus on things like ethical procurement. And I have to say, we took up issues around climate change. We've taken them up at work. In the last 18 months, we've done deputations to the Council, to the Pensions Committee, about divesting from fossil fuels. And to be honest, you wouldn't really know it, but then the school students walked out, and Extinction Rebellion blocked central London, and suddenly Camden Council has declared a climate emergency. Good though our deputations were, I don't think it was those that swung it, it was the young boots on the street that did it. We held a lunchtime union meeting recently on climate justice and came up with demands to make our workplace greener. And this week we met with senior management to present those demands, but also to say that if the Council's declaration is to mean anything, we should be on the Earth Strike on 20th of September along with the students. and that we want the council leader to march with us. Now, obviously, the sponsors will take that away and think about it, but we made it clear that that's what we'll be campaigning for, and we've now started drawing up a plan of action to try and build amongst our members to support the strike. We're getting a school student in to speak, we'll be leafleting and anything else we can do to mobilise for the most important thing we can do. I can't stand here and promise we'll be walking out, but actually we've decided that we're going to aim high and trying to organise to get there.
Thank you, Liz. I'm delighted to announce our next speaker tonight will be Chris Williamson. He's the MP for I can see his reputation precedes him. As I can see many of you know, he's the MP for Derby North, and I want to say that we're really, really pleased to welcome him here to Marxism Festival this year.
Well, blimey, thank you so much for that introduction. That was an amazing welcome and very moving, I've got to say. Oh, sorry. Oh, hang on. Can you hear me? I'll hold it. Right. I always feel like I'm going to sing when I hold it like this. I was just saying, no, thank you so much for that introduction and that welcome. It really was incredibly moving, and I wish there were a few MPs in here because I'm pretty friendless in Parliament at the moment. But I was asked to talk about socialism and Corbynism and the future of politics, which I think is a theme of this session now. And I'm very optimistic, I've got to say, about the future of socialism, because the capitalist ideals have run out of road, it seems to me, and Melissa's point about the potential climate catastrophe that we're facing, you know, market solutions will not address the climate catastrophe, and the only way that we're going to address climate change is through a collective response, through a socialist response. But I just want to talk about a few quick things, if I can, because I haven't got a lot of time. Oh, hang on. A lot of time. Hello. It's back. Yeah, we haven't got a lot of time to speak. But I think for me, the key thing in relation to delivering it keeps going off. What am I doing? The key thing is democracy. We need to democratise the political process. Now, one of the reasons I think why I've become unpopular with some people and popular with others is that I believe that we need more democracy in the Labour Party, and I believe that candidates in each election should get the endorsement of their members before they can stand at another election. But, that's not that radical, because around the world, as far as I'm aware, every other democracy, any elected representative has to go through an endorsement process from their members. But it's not just about democratising the party, although important that is, both in terms of how we select candidates, both in terms of how we make policy. But I think it's also crucial in terms of democratising the economy. I mean, Keir Hardie said around 100 or so years ago that we've democratised the political sphere, now we need to democratise the industrial sphere, and we've still got a hell of a long way to go, it seems to me. Now, one of the most radical proposals in Labour's last manifesto was the commitment to introduce a right to own, so that workers whose companies are going to be sold off will have the first right of refusal to buy out those companies. What we need to embark upon is an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power in this country, and that will be a huge step in that direction, because what we want to do is to create a network of worker cooperatives in the country so that workers do have a genuine say over the future of their lives and the future of their workplace. And were it in place when people like James Dyson, who likes to cloak himself in the Union Jack, decided to offshore his company to the Far East, well, if the workers had had a say on that, then I don't think that would have happened, would it? And so I think it's so important, therefore, that we do give workers greater say, greater power, and greater control over their destiny in their workplace. So workplace democracy, industrial democracy, has to be a key, it seems to me. And we were moving, I think, in that direction in terms of Labour's last manifesto. There's more, I think, that we need to do. But when you actually look at the sort of proposals that Labour included in its last manifesto, the sort of socialist propositions, there is overwhelming support for it from the wider general public, is there not? And you may have seen Giles Brandreth going around looking for secret socialists in Guildford, and virtually everybody he stopped on the street was saying, yes, I agree with the sort of questions they were putting to him about renationalising the railways, regulating the private rented sector, scrapping tuition fees, bringing the utilities back into public ownership. So there is huge support, it seems to me, for a socialist proposition going forward. And as I've already said, if we're going to deal with the biggest crisis facing humanity, and that is climate change, we need a socialist solution to deliver that. I think the other two things I just want to say briefly a little bit about, because often people say, oh, it's all very well, you want to do this, that and the other. Where are you going to get the money from? How are you going to pay for it? But of course it's a nonsense question. And it's a trick question, actually. And regrettably, many of us on the left do end up falling into it. Because it's almost as if there is a finite amount of money over in the corner there. We can only spend so much of it, and we need these rich people over here to be able to keep replenishing the stock of money. That isn't how it works. So we need to start getting a grip, it seems to me, of how the monetary system operates in this country. Because the truth is, tax doesn't pay for public services in any event. Now that might sound counterintuitive, but the truth is, we have our own central bank, don't we? Only the Bank of England is empowered to create pound sterling. And what happened when we had the capitalist crisis, the neoliberal crisis, when the banks crashed? We just magicked up billions and billions of pounds, was it 375 billion pounds, out of thin air. So the point is, if you can magic up money out of thin air to bail out the banks, well, we can create money to invest in the economy, to actually generate decent jobs, to support our public services. This isn't fantasy. This is how the monetary system operates in reality, actually. And in order to, give a value to the pound sterling, well, how do we think they would do that? Because it's just a piece of paper, isn't it? I mean, it's worthless, isn't it? Unless some value is created somehow. And the way we create the value is by a tax liability. And so the corporations and people, in order to actually pay their tax liability, they need to get this pound sterling, don't they? So I often think of it in the way as an analogy with the board game Monopoly, if anybody's ever played that. Have you played Monopoly in here? What's the first thing you do in a game of Monopoly after you pick the dog and the rest of it? You pick the banker. What does the banker do? The banker spends money into the game. So the first thing that happens is the banker, the government, if you like, puts money into the monopoly game, the economy, in order to make the game start. Otherwise, it couldn't start. And it's a similar thing with the economy. And another interesting thing in monopoly, it says the banker can never go bankrupt. And when you run out of the money, the sort of the monopoly money, you write IOUs. It's in the rules if you've seen it. But the point is, we have our own central bank. We're the 5th biggest economy in the world. And if we, as a movement, start to get a grip of an understanding of how the monetary system operates, then I think the nonsense which is often put out there, we're running out of the money, or the last Labour government maxed out the credit card when Dennis Healey went to the IMF, for those of you that are old enough to remember that, in 1976, it was all a con. And people like Tony Benn and many people in the Labour Party were saying this isn't necessary. This is the wrong thing to do. And I've often made this point. I've said Miliband, not necessarily the greatest socialist, but, somebody who was offering a more progressive proposition, I think, than Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did. But he said, if we'd listened to our members, if we'd listened to the movement a bit more when Labour was in government from 1997 to 2010, we wouldn't have made as many mistakes. Now, we wouldn't have gone to an illegal war in Iraq. We wouldn't have introduced tuition fees. We wouldn't have got benefits for the poorest people in society. So I believe in democracy, in democratising the party, listening to our movement, listening to our members. And the great Tony Benn made a really important point when he said that the important thing is to democratise our party in order to democratise society. Because in order to get some of these, I was going to say radical, but they're not that radical, it's just common sense, policies delivered, we need to get the politicians in there, we need to create, the backbone, the political will to actually make this economy, this fifth biggest economy in the world, work for everybody. How can it possibly be justified that in the fifth biggest economy in the world, we've got people sleeping on the streets in every town and city in our country? The fifth biggest economy in the world. How is that possible? It's possible because of a corrupt, broken, rotten system that needs to be thrown out, that there's an appetite to throw it out. But unfortunately, there is a group of people located in SW1 who don't want that to happen. And it's up to us, as a wider Labour movement, to make sure that the people in SW1, the people that are elected to represent their electors, to represent the Labour movement, actually do what they are elected to do. They do what it says on the tin. Our job is to represent the masses, not to represent the elites. And for far too long now, Parliament has represented the interests of the elites, and we need to change that. And the final thing I just want to say, because I've been told to wind up, is in relation to Brexit. Now, I'm somebody that campaigned for Remain. Nobody in Derby campaigned harder for Remain than I did. Actually, I was out every night knocking on. It was a Remain and Reform agenda. Knocking on doors, and when I wasn't knocking on doors, I was speaking at public meetings. So when I wasn't doing that, I was organising street stalls in Derby city centre. But we lost. And I lost my seat in 2015 as an MP, came back in 2017. I was told, by the way, to distance myself from Jeremy because the most important thing was winning, and it's a bit tricky if you kind of say you're close to Jeremy. So I don't agree with that. One, I think it's a dishonourable thing to do, and secondly, I think it's a winning formula. So I issued a press release saying I'm the most Corbyn-friendly candidate standing anywhere in the country, and we won. So obviously there's something in that. But when I lost my seat in 2015, by just 41 votes, the most marginal seat in England, it was a bitter pill to swallow. I mean, I'm born and bred in Derby. I live 100 yards from where I was born, I'm just a working class kid from Derby, and I worked on a building site and so on. I managed to get out eventually, but I'm in Parliament now, but. And so it was a massive blow. But we lost, and I had to accept it. And the same is true, I don't know if people will have different views in here perhaps, but we lost the referendum. But in the end, the issue about whether we're in or out the European Union is irrelevant. Because, as I've said, we've got people sleeping on the streets in every town and city, and that's got far worse whilst we've been in the European Union. We've got 14 million people in the fifth biggest economy in the world living in poverty. 1.5 million people are destitute in the fifth biggest economy in the world whilst we're inside the European Union. If it's such a panacea, how is that possible? Now, I'm not blaming the European Union. I'm going to wind up. I'm not blaming the European Union for that necessarily, although I do think it's fettered the ability of organised labour to represent workers, and I haven't got time to explain why I mean that. But for me, I think the issue is not how many angels can dance on the head of a Brexit pin. The issue is a socialist alternative outside the European Union, because that's what people voted for. And of course, we need to stress our internationalist credentials. I'm not saying become little Englanders, of course not. But the key is this. 2 quick, very short points, and then we'll sit down. People say there will be, an economic impact if you leave the European Union, you know. It's going to be the worst for you. And as I've already said, they've got 40 million people living there. Where's all the fruits of this economic growth going? But for me, yes, all the economic forecasts say that whether we leave with or without a deal, the economy will continue to grow. But the issue is, where are the fruits of that growth going? But let's deal with the economic shock through a big fiscal stimulus, as I've already said. We have our own central bank. Only the Bank of England is allowed anywhere in the world to print the pound sterling. You know, it's a sovereign currency. So we have a big fiscal stimulus to address economic impact, and then we commit to unambiguous redistribution of income and wealth. And if we do that, we'll lift the living standards of the 99%, even if the economy were to shrink a bit. So, the future, comrades, is bright. The future is socialism. The future is democracy. Together, we'll change the world. So let's go and do it.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really like that. The future is bright, the future is red. Okay, our final speaker before we open up the discussion to the floor is going to be Charlie Kimber. He's the editor of the Socialist Worker newspaper, and he's also the Joint National Secretary of the Socialist Workers' Party.
Well, thanks, comrades, and thanks to everyone who's come along tonight. Before I start my main talk, I want to spend 2 minutes on why the defence of Chris Williamson is important. To be clear, for the press watching or in the hall, I haven't cleared this with Chris. He doesn't bear responsibility for what I'm going to say now. We come from different political traditions, so it's not him speaking, it's me speaking. But I do think it matters. And it matters because whether you're inside the Labour Party or not, there are 4 big questions behind the way that anti-Semitism slurs are being used. Anti-Semitism is a real thing which has to be fought whenever it manifests itself. But what's going on is a use of anti-Semitism smears to carry out a political process. Number 1, it's an attack on Jeremy Corbyn. They don't want to take him on over the health service, over the fact, did you see last week a report that said 130,000 people had died early because of the austerity cuts in the National Health Service. They don't want to take him on over housing. They don't want to take him over tuition fees. They don't want to take him on over the question of climate change. And so they've found baseless lies to use against Corbyn and the Labour left. Secondly, it's a weapon of distraction from the racism of the Tory party. There is an institutionally racist party in Britain. It's called the Conservatives. And they are about most probably to elect a leader who talks about black people as piccaninnies with watermelon smiles, who talks about Muslim women as looking like letterboxes, and many other people who will vote for Boris Johnson as leader will vote for him not despite those sorts of things he said, but because he said those sorts of things. It is a party riddled with Islamophobia, and a party that defended in Europe Viktor Orban, the most disgustingly anti-Semitic leader in Europe. Thirdly, it's part of the process of enforcing compromises on a Labour government in advance of them getting into office. If they can force the compromises over the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition and examples, if they can kick out people like Chris Williamson and activists of that sort, it will show how they can push back against the radicalism of the Labour Party and prepare for later. It's also being used by the Labour right in that way as well. And the final reason it matters is because it's an attack on the Palestinians. It's a way of saying, don't look at the way that the kids are being gunned down in Gaza. Don't look at the oppression of the Palestinians that's existed since 1948. The way of saying that look at the slurs about anti-Semitism, rather about the real oppression that the Palestinians face, and we stand with the Palestinians over that. Okay, let's understand what's going on here. We face a very important time, don't we, in British politics? The Tory government is in complete chaos. Do we have a government? I'm not really sure about whether we do or not. But there's a complete uncertainty politically about what will come afterwards. They're determined to prevent the election of a Labour government. And it's not just the Tories and the media that support them. A very leading part in this process is being played by the Labour right wing. Tom Watson acts as if he is the Labour Party leader. He acts as if he doesn't have to take cognizance of the left-wing policies of Jeremy Corbyn and those who support it. The last time I looked, and I regret the number may have got higher since, 120 MPs and peers had signed the letter telling the Labour Party to get rid of Chris Williamson. And the roll call of them is well known to many of us. Tom Watson, Owen Smith, Liz Kendall, Stella Creasy, Stephen Kinnett, Wes Streeting, Jess Phillips, Margaret Hodge, and so on. These are the people who used to say that Corbyn and the left were unelectable, and now they fear terribly he might be electable. Because these people do not want a fundamental change in British society. They do not want to see a transformation of economic and political and social relations. They want to defend the bosses, they want to keep the system as it is, and they want a nice, safe Labour Party, which is a boss's B team when the Tories drop out of the running. And we stand against those sorts of people, but we need to recognise something else. They have not faced the sorts of reselections that Chris spoke about. I know it was very controversial when he went on a road tour to go and talk about reselection in a number of constituencies. But the trouble is, there have been no reselections of that sort. There's been no attempt to get rid of those sorts of people, and they are now sitting still immensely powerful inside the Labour Party. And I'll tell you this, I don't trust any of those people to vote for the more radical policies of Jeremy Corbyn if he gets into government. I'm not even sure that all of them would vote for Jeremy Corbyn to be the Prime Minister of Britain. They would prefer a national government under some safe right-wing Labour figure, some Liberal Democrat or someone of that sort. And therefore they are an immense block on real change inside Britain. And it raises questions about a Labour Party which has an energised membership of hundreds of thousands, which have repeatedly demonstrated their support for Corbyn and the left, and yet there is still, inside the parliamentary party, a huge block of people who are determined to prevent any change of that sort. It tells us something about the sort of Labour Party that it exists. But actually, that's a more minor question of the bigger block that we face against us. I am very optimistic about the potential for change in Britain, but I know also what it would take to overcome the resistance of the other side. Because we know that there are lots of people who are already manoeuvring to stop any sort of radical change in Britain. There was a woman called Stella Rimington who used to run the MI5 agency between 1992 and 1996. She spoke at a festival, not this one I should say, although she might once have been in the audience, I don't know, but she spoke at the Cheltenham Literary Festival, and she said that it's really quite ironic Now, inside Momentum, I see the people we used to look at the Trotskyite organisations in the 1980s. And they are determined to make sure that those people never get into a place where they can have an effect on British politics. Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, says that Corbyn is a danger to the nation who wouldn't clear my security vetting. The Financial Times talks up a worn-up version of socialism in one country. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo: it could be that Corbyn manages to run the gauntlet and get elected. It is possible. You should know we won't wait for him to do those things to begin to push back. We will do our level best. It's too risky and too important and too hard once it's already happened. And it's not so much that these people are going to call the tanks onto the streets if Jeremy Corbyn gets rid of tuition fees. Let me be clear about that. There's lots of things that can be done. But they are the spearhead of a much wider and broader assault upon any attempt to get change in Britain. It's the secret state, it's the more open parts of the state, but crucially, it is the financial and economic powers that will use all of their might to try and prevent a government bringing change. And we know how they will do it. We know it because we've seen it in every previous Labour government, and we see it in the modern world in the measures that were used against François Hollande when he was elected in France for the Socialist Party, and most particularly against Syriza when it was elected in 2015. And they will have a run on the pound, they will cut off investment, they will have strikes inside big business, and they will attempt to break that government. And if you look at Syriza, on Sunday night there will be a general election in Greece. And I regret to say it is highly likely that the Tory party will win in Greece. They're 9 or 10 points ahead in the opinion polls at the moment. In 2015, Syriza was elected as the hope of Europe against austerity. But they were told, the fact you've won an election changes nothing. You still have to do what the European Union, the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund tell you to do. We don't care that you won. Democracy doesn't matter. And Syriza had that great referendum, do you remember? The Ochi referendum, the no referendum. The people of Greece rejected the austerity programme, but because they wanted to play inside the system, within 8 days, Syriza had capitulated to the demands of the Troika. And since then it has implemented a harsher austerity regime than that of its conservative predecessors. And the end result of that is mass pauperisation in Greece, attacking pensioners with tear gas when they demonstrate in Syntagma Square, and herding refugees and asylum seekers into camps on the Greek islands and threatening to deport them to the tender mercies of the Erdogan regime in Turkey. And the disillusion and the frustration that's caused is why on Sunday night the bloody Tories are likely to return in Greece. We don't want to go through that here. We don't want to go through that here. The only way we're going to stop it is not through manoeuvres inside Parliament, not even about getting more MPs like Chris Williamson, but about building a mass movement on the streets and in the workplaces which is capable of winning the sorts of gains which people have won when they've used their strength in that way. We know we're not going to stop climate chaos by a vote in Parliament. It requires an assault upon all the capitalist priorities of big business and of the politicians who support them. We're only going to get it if we have something like the school strikes, something like Extinction Rebellion, 10 or 20 or 30 times bigger, more sustained, and crucially, going into every part of every working class community and linking the class issue to the question of climate change, crucially using the strike weapon that can break the power of the other side. And that's true about climate change. It's true about every other great issue that faces us in Britain and across the world at the moment. Fighting against racism, pushing back against the far right, destroying the austerity regimes and working for a world that works for women and men everywhere. The only way we're going to do that is not by relying on Parliament, but by building a movement outside Parliament and saying that those movements matter more than winning the votes or winning seats in Parliament. That's the way in which people have really won gains in Britain and everywhere else in the world, which is why we stand with Corbyn against the right. We stand with Chris against the filthy attacks that he's faced. But we're also going to keep building an organisation fixated on struggle outside the Labour Party. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. It is immensely pleasure to see all of you here, because I am coming from a state, it's called Kerala, in South India, which is one of the first states in the world. The communists came into the power through the ballot paper. And we are the state having the benefits of the socialist government, which can provide the life quality of any other European country. So I'm very proud to stand here, and thank you to see Chris Williamson here, one of my life heroes. Thank you. And my question is, the point, it's not a question, but the point is that I'm very fed up with this, the attack going against Jeremy Corbyn. They try to every week with a new agenda against him. He was a Trotsky and spy for the Soviet Union, and then he was never going to press the nukes that was important for the people of this country, because they are not worried about the 4.1 million people going on the street without food or the poverty. That's not the concern for them. Whether he is going to press the nukes or not, that's the question for them. It was created by the press. It's not the people. The right-wing media creating for us what to think and what to say. My question is that is one after another is coming to the attacking when the Prime Minister, the Jeremy Corbyn is going to near to the 10th Downing Street. So we need to understand what the real cause is, but never ever coming into the press or from the left, what the real cause behind it. Who are these people? They were the Labour First, and then they were the Labour Manifesto Group, and then the Progress. These the people are behind these allegations that never exposed, and that need to expose that. And whoever the press. And the press is also picking the right-wing suggestions and criticism. They never see the other side of the picture. So we need to understand that what are the forces behind it. And we need to defeat, and the name of, they are the force of capitalism. They are the enemies of the vanguard of the proletarian. That we need to highlight. That's the only way we need to move forward. Thank you, comrade.
Should be followed by Zane from Right, I'm from Sheffield. I'm the Vice President of the Sheffield Trade Union Council, and I'm the co-chair of Stand Up to Racism. I've actually spoke on a platform with Chris Williamson before in Rotherham. I spoke on behalf of Stand Up to Racism, and of course it was Sheffield where the footage from the Momentum meeting was broadcast out, and I know many of the people who were sitting on the platform, they're people who we work alongside. And I know that before Chris came to speak in Sheffield, he was supposed to have been speaking at the university, and that meeting was pulled, the venue was pulled because of the IHRA definition, and it was pulled by members of the Labour Club who pulled that meeting. And I wanted to say that really I think that if Chris Williamson is to be defended, then we have to build a fight. And I say that because actually, if you look at the question of Tommy Robinson, you know, things can unravel in a different direction, can't they? Tommy Robinson is stopped by thousands upon thousands of people leafleting and saying that he's a Nazi. Then the next thing, he's demoralised by that. His ambitions are destroyed. Then he's back in court and only 80 people turn out. And then he's found guilty and hopefully that bastard gets sent down for it. And I'm only repeating this story because I think it's about how you respond to these things, really. In Sheffield, 15,000 people signed a petition organised by the Labour group who support the Palestinians, supporting the Palestinians, ordinary people supporting the Palestinians. I believe that the best activists understand what the argument is about. I don't believe that you'll be defended by the Parliamentary Labour Party, but you can be defended by people from below. And I'll tell you, one of the best things, I think, that we've seen lately has been the student strike. And I say that because it reminded me of when Corbyn came out and organised his rallies around the country. There was a excitement about it, a real excitement, and that's the same with the student strikes. It seemed to me that we have to fight very hard to defend you because we know that you're, like Corbyn, one of the people who's always fought back against the racists, who is completely opposed to anti-Semitism and all forms of racism. But also we have to make sure that we build the struggle as big and as broad as possible, particularly for the 20th, but also we need to build around struggles inside of our workplaces as well. So I think that we need to use the methods that we've always adopted, that we will stand up and fight back on every front.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain from Newham. It's great to be here and it's great to be here with Chris. Solidarity. Just want to thank Chris and the left comrades in the PLP for standing up for the majority, for the many. The turmoil facing in the UK is unprecedented. Poverty, racism, privatisation, the hostile environment. The pay gap between the rich and the poor has ever increased than before. We need a socialist movement. We need a socialist government. You're looking at someone who has a debt of £50,000 before even starting my working career. Education, NHS, all our services have become a money-making scheme. All of the services. And we have had enough. We are, as Chris Williams said, the 5th largest economy in the world. But we do not focus on this. We focus on other stuff to distract us from the main points and problems we are facing. I believe we need to bring back our services, the rail, the water, and all the services that are being used to profit all the services that they have taken away from the public. From the north to the south, there's a massive gap, and it's because of the undistributed, the unethical, the undemocratic way of distributing the wealth. And I believe this is purposely done to divide our communities, and we need to be more wiser. We cannot be divided. We cannot let this happen. We need a Labour socialist government with Jeremy Corbyn for the many, not the few.
Just before everybody starts, I've got a question here from Lucia, who's from Marx, the organisation Marx 21 in Germany. She's got a question she'd like to be read out. She said, could you, Liz, Charlie or Chris, please explain why Labour did so badly in the European elections, and does this have any consequences for national elections?
Hi everyone, mine is just really a question, and it's to do with the fact that this government that we have, this racist government that we have, And everyone knows how racist they are. And the fact that we are about to get Donald Trump Part 2 as the leader of this country. My question is really, why is it that this government, who claims to care for its residents, but we know full well that they don't give a shit about people like you and I, people who are working class, people who struggle sometimes to make ends meet, people who may have visited a food bank or two, because we don't have, not that I have, but that's not the point. But the fact is, there are people here, I can sense people here that have had to visit a food bank. I'm just wondering why this government, British Steel has gone out of business. So how does this government not find the money to help British Steel, but they find the money to £7 billion for war, weapons of mass destruction? That's really my question. You know, I mean, this government or the people of this country are getting poorer and poorer. And every single day I'm hearing that people are losing their jobs. And the fact is that, you know, I went to a meeting this afternoon about the welfare reform. Well, if you look at the country and you ask many people who are claiming benefits, these benefits have been cut and cut and cut to the point where people, you can understand why people are benefit fraudulent, being fraudulent with their benefits, because they are on their knees. Not that I'm encouraging it, but they are on their knees. They're struggling. This government doesn't care. And I urge everybody to vote Labour, because Labour really and truly are the only party that's left that actually cares for its residents. Even if you don't like Jeremy Corbyn is better than what we have now. So bear that in mind. Thank you.
I'm an actor. I can make myself heard, I think. If you can't hear me, I will sue. I'm a member of Hackney North Labour Party, and I never thought I would stand in public and congratulate someone for stating the bleeding obvious. There has ever since Corbyn was elected, I was a member of, or still am a member of Free Speech on Israel and other organisations that were coming together to actually challenge the lies of the racists behind anti-Semitic slurs. Racists like Margaret Hodge, I don't need to go on, you know who I mean, down to the racist excrescence of the Netanyahu government that they will defend, not necessarily because they like them, because it's a way of keeping themselves in their very particular position, which is superannuated, unaccountable, and a right to be there in their interests, not in the interests of the people who they purportedly represent. The way that we reply in the left of the Labour Party, and we are fighting, the way that we reply is very much often looking for someone to run away from, nervously looking around. Well, we've got an election coming up, we've got this coming up, we've got that coming up, before we realise that the soul of our movement, the soul of our party, is in hock to racists, to crypto tourists, to anyone who wants to grab it. The soul struggle is not in the Labour Party, but when they come for the Labour Party, when they get the Labour Party, they'll get you as well. They'll get everybody else as well. It's time to stand up and say, and have the courage. I don't need to tell people in this room, but I think I need to tell many people in the Labour Party, stop running away. We need to fight. If it's Chris Williamson today, oh sorry, it was Jackie Walker yesterday. It'll be Jeremy Corbyn tomorrow. It'll be fantastic anti-racists who have already been expunged.
Please wind up now.
We have to actually fight them, and what matters is what side you are on, not what party you are in. It's the soul, it's what matters to us. What matters to us is socialism and a world worth living in.
Brilliant, thank you.
I want to start off by expressing, like other people who've spoken, my solidarity with Chris and also my admiration. I love your optimism, your confidence in the socialist future. But I don't think you can get socialism without tears. And some of the things that you said did, to me, imply the idea of socialism without tears. And it's the economics of what you said. When you essentially said a Labour government can use the power of the central bank to print money in order to fund reforms. Now, if you're a nerd like me, you know that behind that is something called modern monetary theory, which is very influential on sections of the left internationally at the present time, which says, as Chris did, that value is created by governments when they create the money that people and companies and so on need to pay taxes. Now, because I'm an old Marxist, I don't agree with this. I think value is created by workers, and it's then appropriated by capitalists using their economic power to get profits for themselves. Now, this isn't a kind of a debating point, or me, doing the equivalent of genuflecting or signing the cross and so on, because the Marxist understanding how value created points to relations of class power that structure and dominate the economy, and in particular, the capitalist control of the economy. So say you have a Labour government which does take control of the Bank of England, which won't be easy, that'll be a struggle in itself, and then uses control of the central bank to start printing money. What will the capitalists do? They were very happy when the Bank of England gave them lots of money through quantitative easing at the height of the crisis, because that helped to save their bacon, and they made lots of money about it. But I tell you a secret, they won't like the idea of printing money to employ more nurses or to improve social care. So what will they do? They'll go on strike. They'll stop investing. They'll, as someone mentioned, Charlie I think did, they'll do a run on the pound. They'll force up the rate of inflation. They'll create an economic crisis. They'll create a situation in which, we saw this, for example, in Chile in the early 1970s, sections of the poorer parts of society can be can become hostile to the government because they feel they're getting poorer because of inflation. That's an exercise of class power. The only way you can address that is through a rival assertion of class power, an assertion of class power by organised workers, bringing behind them all the poorer and oppressed sections of society. So, back Corbyn, back Chris, vote Labour, but build up the working class power that can take on the power of capital.
Yes, I am from North Kensington, the impacted Grenfell community, and I'd like to welcome Chris. I know that I spoke to him when he was Shadow Fire Minister, not long after the fire, and I know he was incredibly supportive. And so I kind of am addressing this in part to him, because as the community, as the bereaved, I'm not a bereaved or survivor, I'm an impacted member of the community, I think we're incredibly shocked at the lack of progress for justice. 2 years after one of the most devastating fires that this country has seen since the Second World War. And I think it raises for ordinary working class people questions not only about our justice system, but it raises questions about ordinary working class people and whether our lives matter. It raises questions about the impact of neoliberalism, austerity, on ordinary working class people's lives. And therefore, I think it's really, really important that we look to a government of the future that actually has socialist principles. Because without those, at the moment, we are left with absolutely the minutest amount of progress towards justice. We have a community traumatized, angry, frustrated, and looking at a system that has actually killed 72 people, but at the same time has answered no questions and moved very little to make right all the things that actually led to Grenfell. So it's obvious to us, in terms of thinking about actually socialism going forward, that without a movement outside of Parliament, because to be honest with you, Parliament's done very, very little, without a movement outside Parliament that includes every single one of you here, without actually a movement with struggle, we are not going to get justice. And therefore, we need everybody in this room to actually be voting, hopefully, for a socialist government, but also, as everybody has said, to continue the fight outside Parliament so that actually the community of Grenfell get justice. Thank you.
Well, look, the situation feels very different, doesn't it, to how it did 2 years ago when Jeremy Corbyn, at this point, would have just been fresh off that success in the general election. It actually feels like he's on the back foot at the moment. And you think about those 2 years and the pressures rained on Corbyn, some of them you'd expect from the state. You know, the idea that, that you heard the British troops using his face as target practice. Or, the civil service now briefing that he's too frail to lead the country. Some of that you expect from the state. But the real damage has really come to him from the right wing in his own party and the Parliamentary Labour Party. And when their coups failed, really what they've gone for is a war of attrition. And they've used anti-Semitism at the heart of it. And I just think it's an outrage to use something as serious as anti-Semitism against people that have actually fought against racism, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism all their lives. But you see, I think that you have to call this what it is. And actually, I would call it a witch hunt. And the problem is, with a witch hunt, if you concede to it, it doesn't end it. They keep coming back and attacking. Witch hunts actually have to be resisted and faced down. And I say this actually to the whole left, inside Labour and outside Labour too. This isn't a time to discover our differences. We all know there's some differences on the left and debates can happen. But actually, it's the time to unite and defend those being witch hunted. Because this attack is not just on Chris, it's not just on Corbyn, it's actually on the whole left. It's about weakening the whole left and setting back the movement. It's about weakening us and saying there's no alternative to neoliberal capitalism. And I think that we have to say that if there's a Labour Party that allows Chris Williamson to be forced out, it raises big questions, doesn't it, about the ability to stand up to all the other pressures that would be rained down if they ever got in government. Mike Pompeo, US Foreign Secretary, already saying he'd push back against Corbyn if he ever got in. But we in the SWP, we're in the Socialist Worker Party, we're not in Labour, we're not just here, commentators telling other people what to do. Actually, we want to shape the level of struggle in the ways people have talked about from the platform and from the floor. Actually want to build the movements like Stand Up to Racism that wiped out Tommy Robinson's ability to become an MEP in the North West. And we have a real opportunity with the climate strike on the 20th of September. It's brilliant to hear the ideas from Liz about what she's doing in her workplace, because we've got to think, how do we make that a reality? For every workplace to come out, for people to be involved, to build that movement much bigger. Because these are the things that actually strengthen the left as a whole, actually bring about change and put on the agenda much greater transformation in society.
Rob Ferguson from Newham will be our final speaker before I bring back our platform.
I want to start on a note of solidarity like others, because starting in June 2016, I'm proud to have shared platforms with Ben Jamal from PSC, with leading Labour activists, with Jewish Voice for Labour, with leading figures in the anti-war movement, to take a stand against the rising witch hunt that has taken place over the last 3 years. Last August, we filled Conway Hall to the rafters, and I think that reflected the extent of sentiment against the attacks that were taking place across the left and across the country. And I'm proud too that we're holding this event today with Chris Williamson on the platform. I want to, however, move on to something else, because we are in a common endeavour. In Newham, the Newham Labour comrades here, we are waged a common fight against the academisation of schools in Newham. We have waged a common fight to build an anti-racist movement in Newham. We have been on the same demonstrations against war and against racism. And that common endeavour is critically important. But while we fight side by side, I also have a concern that is based on an aspiration that our side wins. A concern at the way in which the internal pressures on Labour, the pressure for unity, not to fight for a division or a split against the pressures that the right exert, can force a concession, can force a retreat, not just from the right, but also from sections to the left, and that this can move on. And what I would say is this, to repeat the points that have been made here about the movement outside Parliament, to build a mass political force based on the struggles of ordinary people that we're all engaged in now, is critical. And while we do that, I think we need to put to the test the strategies and discussions about what sort of form of organisation we need on the left that can carry those struggles to a conclusion. That means we change the society and see the kind of society that all of us here on the platform and in this hall want.
So first of all, I'd like to ask Liz to come back, please, on the discussion.
Okay, just a couple of points really. Somebody asked about Labour in the European elections. I think there's quite a lot of reasons, more than I can come into in 3 minutes. But I think one of the things is, if we go back to looking at what made Labour do so well in the 2017 general election that I referred to when I started, and you think of all the huge rallies that took place, the way that they brought really the 99% of us together, isn't it? And they were missing in the European elections. The notion of having an organising, mobilising force was missing there. And I think, unfortunately, that did allow Farage to pull a popular vote towards him, even though he didn't even have a manifesto or anything. I think one of the consequences of that is it does make it even more important that we organise against racism over the coming months. The point that the person from Hackney North said, it matters what side you're on, not what party you're in. I think absolutely it matters what side you're on. And we, as people have said, we have to be on the side of Corbyn and of defending Chris, and of course in the bigger picture on the side of socialism. But I do think it does matter what party you're in as well, because when I was talking about the strike that we had in Camden, or the other big strike that we've had in our union that won of the home care workers in Birmingham, at the heart of those branches are SWP members, are people who have an idea about how we organise and fight. And it's not that we're better than anybody else, but it's actually about the strategy that we have, about how to fight, that comes from our politics, the strategy of looking at working class activity and organisation from below, and of trying to build that up in the union and that up to being a force to change society. I think we do, absolutely. I think all of us in the room agree that we need a Corbyn government, but I do think we also need that working class organisation and activity. See, because when you think that 0.24% of the population will decide the next Prime Minister, and it's not any old 0.24%, actually, it's some of the richest 0.24%, of society, or you think that Britain's now got more billionaires than ever before, with, you know, when people say where does the money come from, the top 10 billionaires have got 144 billion pounds in this country, or if you think that in the Amazon rainforest every single minute I don't know what it is, the equivalent of a football pitch in size disappears every single minute, then I think really we know that we've got to fight for a different world.
Okay, Chris will be next to sum up.
Right, I'm told I've got 5 minutes. That's impossible. I could spend 5 minutes on each of the points that were raised and longer. But just briefly, I'll just pick up on a few of the points that were raised. I think the comrade who mentioned MMT, yes, I was referring to MMT, but if Labour and John McDonnell is not convinced by MMT at the moment, although I hope that he will be in fullness of time, but whether Labour adopts an MMT approach or not will not be the determinant of whether or not there is an attack by the establishment and a run on the pound. It will be because we've got a left-wing government, irrespective of whether we adopt MMT or not. And frankly, I'm not too worried about whether or not there is a capital strike, because as I've already made the point, we have the flexibility, having our own central bank. If the private sector wants to invest, well, we can invest, the state can invest. And so long as we are paying for things which are available for sale in pounds sterling, where there is spare capacity in the economy, and there's plenty of that, unemployed workers, underemployed workers, you look at the amount of public service that needs to be done, social care is in crisis, you know, the whole infrastructure and the renewable energy that needs to be invested in, then I don't think there is an issue there at all about that, in my opinion. The point was well made about Grenfell. Absolutely outrageous that here we are, beyond 2 years, and still no full resolution to the situation. But what we do need to do is a complete root and branch change to the way in which we organise local government, the way in which we organise housing, and the way in which we organise our economy. All these things are linked, and if we had a real political will, a real political commitment to make sure that we had public services that were fit for purpose, that we use the economy for the benefit of everybody rather than the rich elites, then obviously that catastrophe would never have happened in the first place, but certainly if we had a proper progressive response to it, then we could have dealt with the crisis. I mean, and Jeremy was pointing out, I think, at the time that there are empty properties, plush empty dwellings in that borough, which is the wealthiest borough in London, as I understand it, which could and should have been requisitioned for the people, and they should have been allocated those homes, but they weren't. The comrade also who made the point about, the attacks on Jeremy, I think the reason is, of course, threefold, really. One, he wants an ethical foreign policy. One of the greatest innovations, I think, of Jeremy is to appoint a shadow minister for peace and disarmament. Just imagine, when Labour's in government, a permanent member of the Security Council with a minister for peace and disarmament, spreading peace and disarmament around the world instead of war and selling arms around the world. That will be a huge innovation, and clearly that is something they absolutely do not want to happen. And of course, he also made a really important speech at last year's Edinburgh Festival, where he talks about democratising the media and breaking up the big media giants. Well, that's the last thing they want as well, isn't it? And talks about top slicing with a windfall tax the big media companies to fund the journalistic cooperatives at a local level, to have proper, meaningful, realistic journalism at a local level throughout the country, and to try and, if you like, rehabilitate what should be an honourable profession, that of journalism, which has been sadly tarnished by the hacks which operate in Fleet Street at the moment. And finally, of course, this whole notion about democratising the economy and making sure that the wealthy elites pay their taxes, closing down the tax loopholes, closing down the tax havens, and making sure that, as I say, everybody pays their way. And just going back to the other points about MMT, I mean, look, the government can invest. We don't need these wealthy people, but what we do need taxes for, of course, is to drive behaviour change, to tackle inequality, to give a value for the currency, and to diminish the power that obviously these very wealthy elites wield in the country. And tax can have a huge, important role for that, as well as dealing with inflation. as well and holding that down. In terms of why we lost badly in the European elections, I don't think we had a convincing message. It was a confused message. And obviously people didn't really turn out in numbers, and many people who would perhaps have normally voted Labour ended up voting for the Brexit Party. That doesn't make them, racist or right-wing, but I think they voted for them in desperation, just as in 2015 people voted UKIP in desperation and then came back in droves when we had a progressive alternative message. And so I think that was the main thing. But I suppose the final thing I just want to say is, and the key thing is, in relation to going forward, and the main theme I think which came out of all of those contributions is that we desperately need a mass movement that will not just carry a socialist government and Jeremy Corbyn hopefully over the threshold of number 10, but sustain us in power when we get there. Another world isn't just possible, it's within touching distance. And our job, it seems to me, is to keep hope alive, because hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. So let's make sure it doesn't. Thank you.
Good luck.
Let me begin by handing Chris a gift. Book I co-authored on the Labour Party Marxist history. And really, our genuine thanks for you coming here tonight. It would have been much easier for you, I'm sure, in some senses, not to turn up, and I know a lot of politicians who would have run away from it. So thank you for being here. My second point is to talk about Brexit and the European elections. And Chris is quite right that a mixed message wasn't never going to be successful. It's also true that lots of the Labour right wanted Labour to do badly, to ramp up the pressure against Corbyn. Let me just say something on Brexit. It is an absolute tragedy that Brexit has become the all-consuming, dominating issue inside British politics, and that people, the working class in particular, is divided around this question. It's very, very important to break from that. In the SWP, we voted leave because we are against the European Union as the force that implements austerity across a continent, and because of the Fortress Europe policies that drown refugees in the Mediterranean. But I know that we have far more in common with someone who voted Remain but who is against racism, austerity and climate chaos than with those on the right who voted to leave. And of course it's true, it's absolutely true that not everyone who voted for the Brexit Party is a racist, let alone a fascist. But Nigel Farage is a racist and is trying to build a party of the far right on the sort of model of Matteo Salvini in Italy. And it is a real danger against which we all need to be fighting. But the reason why Brexit has become so dominant is, I'm afraid, because of the paralysis of the Labour Party around the issue. It is now 6 months since Theresa May lost by 230 votes in the Houses of Parliament on her Brexit deal. Utter crisis for the Tory party. And during that 6 months, neither the trade unions nor the Labour Party have called a demonstration not about Brexit, but about austerity, about racism, about the attacks that working class people are facing. And we shouldn't let any discussion to take place about Brexit without also saying we have to link it to more money for the National Health Service, the end of academies, the stopping of the attacks upon Muslims, the stopping of the attacks upon migrants, real action for working class people, getting rid of the anti-union laws, all the issues which can take people beyond Brexit into a place where working class people can be united. And that's the problem that's been going on in Britain that imperils the unity of the working class, and about the possibility makes it harder for a Labour victory. My final point is this, because I know we have to finish on time. About 2 months ago, I got the copy of the Financial Times with a special supplement, Investing in Greece. And on the front is Alexis Tsipras, from firebrand to economic reformer. Inside it says, by many measures, Syriza was the most radical left-wing party elected to office in a European democracy since the end of the Second World War. Nowadays, Greece's allies and partners from Brussels to Washington are more likely to applaud Tsipras as a politician who douses fires instead of stoking them. We want to make sure that if Jeremy Corbyn is elected, and we all want Jeremy Corbyn to be elected, they never write something like that about him. They're never allowed to write something like that about him. And that means building on the streets and the workplaces. It also means building an organisation which is thoroughly in favour of stoking fires, not dousing them. And if you want to join the fire-stoking party over racism, about austerity and about climate chaos, if you're not a member of the SWP, please join us tonight. Thank you.